The strongest wolf in the Northern Kingdom had faced countless challenges in his life, but no one ever warned him that his greatest defeat would come from a little Omega holding an old wooden broom. Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood was a name every wolf knew. Leaders lowered their voices when speaking to him. Warriors straightened their backs when he entered a room. Even the most confident alphas chose their words carefully around the ruler whose silver-gray wolf had become a legend across the Northern Territories. With dark blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and a presence that filled every hall he walked through, Nathaniel carried the weight of a crown that few could understand. To his people, he was strength. He was authority. He was the Alpha King. But sometimes, that title felt heavier than any battle he had ever fought. Everyone saw the crown before they saw the man wearing it. They asked for decisions, protection, guidance, but rarely did anyone ask if he was tired. That evening, as the golden sunset disappeared behind the tall pine trees surrounding the royal lands, Nathaniel left the castle behind. Not as a king, not as a ruler, just as himself. The moment he shifted into his wolf form, the world became quieter. His massive silver-gray paws moved across the forest floor, the cool earth beneath him and the fresh scent of pine filling the air. Out here, there were no meetings, no expectations, no careful conversations. Only the wind, the trees, and a few peaceful hours where he could simply breathe. His wolf side enjoyed these rare moments of freedom, not because it wanted control, but because it was the only time Nathaniel allowed himself to stop carrying the entire kingdom on his shoulders. Then something moved between the bushes. A small brown rabbit appeared near a patch of wildflowers, completely unaware that the most powerful wolf in the north had noticed it. Nathaniel lowered his head, amused. It was not about hunger. It was instinct, a simple chase, a harmless moment of letting his wolf run. The rabbit looked at him. Nathaniel looked back. For one silent second, neither moved. Then the rabbit ran. Nathaniel followed. The little creature was surprisingly fast, darting between roots and slipping under fallen branches. The Alpha King, who had outsmarted rival leaders and solved impossible problems, suddenly found himself struggling to keep up with a rabbit barely bigger than his paw. If anyone from his council could see him now, they would never let him forget it. The chase continued deeper into the woods until the rabbit spotted a small wooden fence surrounding a quiet cottage at the edge of the forest. It squeezed easily through a tiny gap. Nathaniel realized his mistake 1 second too late. The rabbit fit through. He did not. His large wolf form crashed through the old fence, sending pieces of wood falling into the grass. He tried to stop, but his paws slid across the soft garden soil. Carefully planted rows of rare herbs disappeared beneath him as he stumbled forward. Leaves scattered. Freshly prepared soil covered his fur. A small wooden marker landed right on top of his head. Then everything became silent. The rabbit sat safely on the other side of the garden, staring at him almost proudly before hopping away into the bushes. Nathaniel stood frozen. The Alpha King of the Northern Kingdom had lost. To a rabbit. Slowly he looked around. The garden was destroyed. The herbs had clearly been cared for with patience and love, and now half of them were flattened because he had forgotten one simple fact. A giant wolf should not chase a tiny rabbit into someone's backyard. Then he heard a door open. Nathaniel turned his head. A young woman stepped out of the cottage. She was a little Omega with chestnut brown hair, gentle eyes, and a simple dress covered with traces of garden work. Clara Whitmore stared at the broken fence, then at the ruined herbs, then directly at the enormous wolf standing in the middle of the disaster. Nathaniel waited for the reaction he knew too well. Fear, panic, running away. Instead, Clara placed both hands on her hips and narrowed her eyes. The little Omega was not scared. She was annoyed. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. Nathaniel Blackwood, the Alpha King whose presence could silence an entire room, stood completely still in the middle of a ruined herb garden while a little Omega stared at him with disappointment instead of fear. Clara Whitmore looked down at the broken plants, the scattered soil, and the giant paw prints covering the garden she had cared for every morning. She closed her eyes and took a slow breath, trying to stay calm. When she opened them again, she pointed the broom toward him. Do you have any idea how long these took to grow? Nathaniel lowered his head slightly. It was not because he was afraid. He had faced situations far greater than an upset gardener. Yet something about this moment was completely unfamiliar. There was no hidden intention in Clara's voice. No fear. No attempt to impress him. She was simply upset because someone had ruined something she loved. She stepped closer and gently tapped the broom against his shoulder, the same way someone would correct an oversized dog that had knocked over furniture. "Look at you," she sighed. "Huge, covered in dirt, destroying gardens. You are not scary. You are just big trouble." Nathaniel froze. Big trouble. For years, he had been called many things. Your Majesty, Alpha King, the strongest wolf in the north. Titles followed him everywhere he went. But this little Omega, standing in a small garden with dirt on her dress and a broom in her hand, had looked directly at him and given him the most ridiculous nickname he had ever heard. The logical part of him immediately reacted. She just called the Alpha King Big Trouble. She just touched the ruler of the northern packs with a broom. He should have felt insulted. He should have walked away and forgotten this strange little encounter. But strangely, he did not want to. The usual tension he carried was quiet. The constant pressure of being feared by everyone around him faded for a moment. His instincts did not sense disrespect. They sensed honesty. Clara did not know he was powerful. She did not know he had a castle, an army, or a crown waiting for him. She only saw a wolf who made a mistake. And somehow, that felt more real than the admiration of thousands. Then Clara noticed movement near the corner of the garden. The little rabbit slowly peeked out from behind a wooden box. She looked at the rabbit, then back at Nathaniel. Slowly, understanding appeared on her face. "Wait a second." She crossed her arms. "You destroyed my entire garden because you were chasing that tiny thing." Nathaniel looked away. For some reason, that made him look even guiltier. Clara shook her head. "So not only are you big trouble, but you also scared a poor little rabbit half your size." If his royal guards were watching this, Nathaniel knew they would never believe it. The most respected alpha in the kingdom was standing there being lectured about being unfair to a rabbit. And even more unbelievable, he was letting it happen. Clara walked toward the broken gate and opened it wider. "All right, out you go." Nathaniel looked at her. She pointed outside. "Yes, you. Out, big trouble. And leave that rabbit alone." Any other command would have been ignored. Any other person would never have dared. But after a quiet moment, Nathaniel turned around and walked out. His ears lowered slightly, and his tail moved down naturally as he left the garden, looking far less like a legendary wolf and far more like a giant pet caught making a mess. Clara watched him disappear between the trees and shook her head with a small smile. What a strange wolf. She had no idea she had just sent away the most powerful alpha in the Northern Kingdom. Nathaniel returned through the forest as the evening air grew colder. He should have forgotten about it before reaching the castle. It was nothing more than an accident. She was just an Omega living near the woods. A normal girl with a normal life. That was what he told himself. But hours later, he was not thinking about the hunt. He was not thinking about the rabbit. He was thinking about the only person who had ever looked at him without fear. The girl who had called him Big Trouble. The moment Nathaniel Blackwood returned to the castle, everything went back to the way it was supposed to be. The tall stone halls were perfectly clean. The guards stood straight as he passed. Servants lowered their heads respectfully, and every voice around him carried the same careful tone he had heard for years. "Welcome back, Your Majesty. What are your orders, Alpha King? Is there anything you require?" It was familiar. It was respectful. It was exactly how a king was expected to be treated. So why did it suddenly feel strangely empty? Nathaniel walked through the castle corridors with the same calm expression he always wore, but his thoughts were somewhere else entirely. They were not on the reports waiting in his office. They were not on the responsibilities of the kingdom. They were back in a tiny garden at the edge of the forest with a little Omega who had no idea who he was. Clara Whitmore, the girl who looked at the most feared wolf in the Northern Kingdom and decided he was simply a problem standing in her flower beds. The corner of Nathaniel's mouth almost lifted at the memory. Almost. He stopped himself immediately. This was ridiculous. He was the Alpha King. He had important matters to handle. He did not have time to think about an Omega with a broom, especially one who had called him Big Trouble. Later that evening, Nathaniel sat in the council room surrounded by his most trusted advisors. Maps covered the large wooden table. Reports were being delivered one after another. As always, Nathaniel listened carefully. He answered questions. He made decisions. No one in the room would have guessed anything was different, until one advisor mentioned that several villages needed help restoring farmland and gardens after the changing season. Nathaniel immediately looked up. Gardens. The entire room became quiet. His advisors exchanged confused looks. The Alpha King, who normally focused on major issues affecting the entire kingdom, had suddenly become interested in gardens. Yes, Your Majesty, the advisor answered carefully. Small farms, herbs, ordinary things like that. Herbs. That single word brought the image back again. Clara standing there with dirt on her dress, looking more upset about broken plants and a frightened rabbit than the giant wolf in front of her. Nathaniel looked down at the documents in his hand and realized he had been reading the same line 3 times. That never happened. After the meeting ended, he stood alone near the castle balcony, looking toward the dark outline of the forest. The logical answer was simple. She was just an Omega. It was just an unusual encounter. She did not even know who he was. By tomorrow, he would forget about it. But even as he told himself that, he knew something was different. It was not her appearance. It was not curiosity about her life. It was the feeling he had when she spoke to him. For once, someone had not treated him like a title. Clara had not seen a king. She had not seen a legend. She had only seen someone who made a mistake in her garden and needed to hear about it. Somehow, that honesty stayed with him longer than any compliment ever had. Deep within, his instincts remained unusually calm whenever he remembered her voice. Not demanding, not controlling, just quietly reminding him of one simple truth. He was still thinking about her. Nathaniel closed his eyes and sighed. Impossible. A little Omega from the forest could not possibly distract the Alpha King. Yet long after the castle became silent, one name continued to return to his thoughts. Not Nathaniel Blackwood. Not Your Majesty. Big trouble. That night, long after the castle became quiet, Nathaniel Blackwood was still awake. The moonlight shined through the tall windows of his room, and the entire kingdom outside rested peacefully under his protection. Normally, moments like this were when he reviewed plans, solved problems, and prepared for another day of leading his people. But tonight, his thoughts kept returning to a little cottage near the forest. More specifically, to a little Omega who had pointed a broom at him and called him Big Trouble. Nathaniel sighed. This was becoming unreasonable. Clara Whitmore was just an Omega, a kind but ordinary girl who had no idea she was speaking to the Alpha King. It was one strange meeting. Nothing more. Yet the more he tried to convince himself, the more he remembered the disappointment in her eyes when she saw the damaged herbs. He had destroyed something she spent months caring for. That was the reason he needed to return. Not because he wanted to see her again. Not because hearing that silly nickname made him feel something he could not explain. It was responsibility. A king corrects his mistakes, he quietly told himself. The next morning, Nathaniel called one of his servants and gave a very unusual request. He needed the healthiest herb seedlings available, the rarest plants from the royal gardens, and the best seeds that could grow in the northern climate. The servant paused for a moment. Your Majesty, are these for a new royal garden project? Nathaniel remained silent. How exactly was he supposed to explain that the Alpha King needed them because he chased a rabbit, destroyed an Omega's garden, and got chased away with a broom? Some stories did not need to reach the castle. Just prepare them, he answered calmly. By evening, Nathaniel returned to the edge of the forest in his wolf form, carrying the carefully prepared plants. The cottage looked peaceful. Warm light glowed through the windows, and the little garden was quiet. He approached slowly, placed the new herbs near the door, then stepped back into the trees. That was enough. He fixed his mistake. He could leave now, but for some reason, he stayed. A few moments later, the door opened. Clara stepped outside and noticed the plants immediately. She looked surprised, then looked toward the forest. Nathaniel knew she could see him standing between the trees. Instead of being afraid, she smiled. So Big Trouble actually has manners. The words should have annoyed him. Instead, Nathaniel found himself strangely pleased. He had received endless compliments from important people, but somehow this small teasing comment felt more honest than all of them. He returned to the castle telling himself it was finished. The garden would recover. Clara had received an apology. There was no reason to go back. Then the next evening arrived. And somehow, Nathaniel found himself carrying more plants through the same forest path. This is the last time, he decided. He only wanted to make sure the garden was completely restored. Nothing more. He quietly walked to the cottage, placed another bundle of herbs near the entrance, and prepared to leave. But this time, the door opened before he could disappear. Clara stood there with a knowing smile. Big Trouble. Nathaniel stopped. The most powerful alpha in the Northern Kingdom, the man who could handle any responsibility placed on his shoulders, suddenly had no idea what to do because a little Omega had caught him delivering plants. After one silent second, he turned and quickly disappeared back into the forest. Clara watched the giant wolf run away and laughed softly. Now she was certain of one thing. Big Trouble would come back again. And next time, she would not wait at the door. Next time, she would catch him properly. The next morning, Nathaniel Blackwood told himself the matter was finished. The garden had been repaired enough. The rare herbs had been replaced. Clara Whitmore had accepted his apology, even if she did not realize the apology came from the Alpha King himself. There was no reason to return to the small cottage near the forest. No reason at all. Yet somehow, before sunset arrived, Nathaniel found himself standing at the edge of the woods again with another bundle of carefully selected herbs. He stared down at the plants and let out a quiet breath. This was unnecessary. He knew it. The logical part of him knew Clara probably had everything she needed. But another part of him remembered the way her face brightened when she saw the new plants. He remembered how naturally she smiled when she called him Big Trouble. So he created one final explanation. Maybe she needed a few more. That was all. This time, Nathaniel had a plan. He was the Alpha King of the Northern Kingdom. He could move through forests without being noticed. He understood patience, timing, and observation better than anyone. Surely, delivering a few plants to an Omega's garden without being seen would be simple. He waited until the cottage seemed quiet. The evening breeze moved softly through the trees. The garden looked peaceful. Nathaniel stepped forward in his wolf form, carefully avoiding every single herb this time. He placed each paw slowly, making sure he did not damage even one leaf. The last thing he needed was another lecture about being Big Trouble. He reached the front of the cottage, gently placed the plants near the entrance, and turned around. Perfect. No broken fence. No ruined garden. No broom. Then a voice behind him said, "Caught you." Nathaniel stopped instantly. Slowly, he turned his head. Clara was standing behind a large herb bush near the gate with her arms crossed and a very proud smile on her face. The Alpha King, the most skilled hunter in the Northern Territories, had just been caught by a little Omega hiding behind garden plants. Not because she was stronger, not because she was faster, but because she understood him. Somehow, that was even more surprising. Clara stepped out from her hiding place and looked at the bundle of herbs. "So you really thought you could keep sneaking into my garden forever?" Nathaniel stayed silent. Of course, he understood every word. But Clara still believed she was talking to a very intelligent wolf. She walked closer and looked at him carefully. The anger from their first meeting was gone. Now there was only amusement and curiosity. "You know," she said softly, "most creatures that destroy a garden do not come back with replacements." Nathaniel lowered his head slightly. Clara smiled. "So I guess you are not completely trouble." She paused. "Just mostly Big Trouble." There it was again. That name. The name no one else would ever dare call him. And somehow, it bothered him less each time he heard it. Then Clara looked back at the garden and placed her hands on her hips. "But there is one problem." Nathaniel looked at her. She pointed toward the plants. "You cannot just drop these at my door and run away every night." She walked over, picked up a small garden tool, and placed it in front of him. "You made the mess, so you are helping me fix it." Nathaniel stared at the tool. The Alpha King who ruled an entire kingdom was now apparently being assigned garden work by an Omega who had no idea who he was. Before he could even process that, Clara lifted one finger. "And one extra day of work." Nathaniel looked back at her. "Extra?" Clara nodded seriously. "For chasing that poor little rabbit." For a moment, everything became silent. The ruler of the Northern Packs had officially been punished for scaring a rabbit. It was so unexpected that Nathaniel did not even know how to react. He should leave. He had responsibilities waiting for him. A castle, a kingdom, people who needed him. But as he looked at Clara standing there, waiting for him as if he was simply her troublesome forest visitor, he realized something strange. He did not want to leave. Clara smiled and nodded toward the garden. "Come on, Big Trouble. Time to work." And for the first time in his life, Nathaniel Blackwood did not spend the evening leading meetings, making decisions, or carrying the weight of a crown. Instead, the most powerful Alpha in the North stayed beside a little Omega, helping her rebuild the garden he accidentally ruined. For the first time in his life, Nathaniel Blackwood found himself facing a challenge he had never prepared for. Gardening. The Alpha King had spent years making difficult decisions, protecting his people, and carrying responsibilities that stretched across the entire Northern Kingdom. He understood leadership. He understood patience. But standing in the middle of Clara Whitmore's garden, while trying to carefully place a tiny herb plant into the soil, was something completely new. Clara watched him for a moment before shaking her head with a small laugh. Easy, big trouble. Nathaniel looked at her. We are planting herbs, she continued, pointing at the ground. Not rebuilding the whole forest. If anyone from the castle saw this moment, Nathaniel knew they would never believe it. Their powerful Alpha King, carefully taking gardening lessons from a little Omega who thought he was simply a very unusual wolf. But strangely, he was not bothered by it. He listened. He slowed down. He learned. As the afternoon passed, Nathaniel helped repair the small wooden fence he had broken. He carried water from the nearby stream. He moved supplies around the garden and helped place every new herb exactly where Clara wanted it. At first, he thought the work would be simple. After all, how difficult could caring for a small garden be compared to leading an entire kingdom? But slowly, he began to understand something. Strength could protect something from danger, but care was what helped something grow. Every plant Clara touched had a purpose. Every small detail mattered to her. She remembered which herbs needed more sunlight, which ones needed more shade, and even which flowers the little animals nearby liked the most. While they worked, Clara talked. A lot. She told Big Trouble about the garden, about the forest, about little things that most people would never mention to a king. She had no idea Nathaniel understood every word. People always think small things are not important, she said while fixing a row of herbs. But I think everything deserves a little care. Nathaniel quietly watched her. There was no bitterness in her voice. No anger toward the world. Even though she was an Omega who had often been underestimated, Clara had not allowed that to take away her kindness. That was what stayed with him the most. At the castle, people respected him because of what he could do. They needed his decisions, his protection, his strength. But Clara did not need any of that. She did not even know those things existed. She only wanted Big Trouble to stop stepping on plants and maybe help carry a little water. Somehow, that simple expectation felt more meaningful than he could explain. Hours passed quickly. The sun slowly lowered behind the trees, covering the little garden in warm golden light. What had started as a disaster was beginning to look alive again. Clara stepped back and looked at their work with a satisfied smile. Then she looked at the large wolf beside her. See, she said, you are actually pretty helpful when you are not destroying everything. Nathaniel lowered his head slightly, almost as if accepting the compliment. He had heard countless words of praise before. Leaders had praised his wisdom. Warriors had praised his strength. Entire crowds had praised his victories. But a simple compliment from a little Omega about fixing a garden somehow stayed with him more clearly than all of them. Because it was not meant for the Alpha King. It was meant for him. The evening grew quieter, and Nathaniel knew he should leave. The castle was waiting. His responsibilities were waiting. He had already stayed far longer than he planned. He turned toward the forest, ready to return to the life he knew. Then Clara's voice stopped him. Big Trouble. Nathaniel turned back. She stood near the cottage door, looking at him with the same honest kindness that had confused him from the beginning. You worked all day, she said. Do you want to stay for dinner? For a moment, Nathaniel did not move. Because throughout his life, almost everyone had asked what he could give, what he could solve, or what he could carry for them. But Clara was not asking anything from him. She was simply asking him to stay. And for the first time in a very long time, the Alpha King did not know how to walk away. For a moment, Nathaniel Blackwood simply looked at Clara Whitmore, unsure if he had heard her correctly. Stay for dinner. It was such a simple invitation. Nothing about those 3 words should have surprised him. Yet somehow they did. At the castle, people invited him to grand events and important gatherings all the time. Every seat was carefully prepared. Every meal was planned perfectly. Every conversation followed tradition and respect. But those invitations were always for the Alpha King. The crown. The leader. The symbol everyone depended on. Clara was different. She was not asking for anything. She was not hoping to gain favor. She did not even know who he truly was. She only saw Big Trouble, the giant wolf who had spent the day helping fix the garden he ruined, and she thought he deserved a warm meal after working hard. That simple thought made Nathaniel remain still longer than he expected. He knew he should return to the castle. There were reports waiting for him, advisors who would look for him, responsibilities that never truly ended. But when Clara smiled and opened the cottage door wider, he found himself taking a step forward instead of leaving. The inside of Clara's home was nothing like the castle. It was small and simple, with dried herbs hanging near the kitchen, a few books stacked beside the window, and the comfortable warmth of a place that was truly lived in. There were no servants rushing around, no formal greetings, no one standing carefully because the Alpha King entered the room. Just peace. Clara moved around the kitchen, preparing dinner while occasionally talking to him, as if having a giant wolf sitting near the fireplace was the most normal thing in the world. The meal was simple: chicken stew with vegetables from her garden, fresh herbs, and a small piece of homemade bread. Nothing rare, nothing expensive, nothing like the meals prepared in the royal kitchen. Nathaniel had eaten dishes created by the best cooks in the kingdom. He had sat at long tables filled with more food than one person could ever need. Everything had always been perfect, but perfection was not the same as warmth. Those meals came with schedules, meetings, and expectations. This meal came with Clara placing a bowl down and saying, "You worked hard today, big trouble. You must be hungry." Nathaniel looked at the food quietly. Such a small sentence. Yet he could not remember the last time someone asked about his needs without first thinking about his title. As he ate, he understood something unexpected. It was good, really good. Not because it was the most expensive meal he had ever tasted. Not because it was prepared by famous chefs, but because someone had made it with genuine care. Clara watched him finish the food much faster than she expected and raised an eyebrow. "Really?" she laughed softly. "For someone who destroyed my herbs, you really enjoy eating them." Nathaniel paused. If his advisors could see him now, sitting in an Omega's cottage while being teased about a bowl of stew, they would probably question everything they knew about their serious king. But he did not mind. Actually, he liked it. His instincts, usually alert from years of responsibility, felt unusually calm. Not because of the food itself, because of the feeling around it. No expectations, no distance, just a quiet evening where he did not need to be anything more than himself. After dinner, Clara cleaned the small kitchen while continuing to talk about ordinary things. The weather, the garden, the herbs she wanted to grow next. Small topics that would never appear in a royal meeting. Yet somehow Nathaniel found himself listening more carefully than he did to most formal speeches. Outside, the sky became darker and the forest grew quiet. Nathaniel knew he had already stayed too long. He slowly stood, preparing to return to the castle and the life waiting for him beyond the trees. But before he reached the door, Clara looked back. Big trouble. He stopped. She smiled and gently nodded toward the warm fireplace. Stay a little longer. And once again, the Alpha King, who was used to carrying an entire kingdom, made the simplest decision of the day. He stayed. The small cottage became quieter as the night settled over the forest. Outside, the trees moved gently with the cool evening wind, and the world beyond Clara Whitmore's garden slowly disappeared into darkness. Inside, the fireplace filled the room with a soft warmth Nathaniel Blackwood had not felt in a very long time. He rested near the fire while Clara sat nearby, holding a warm cup of tea made from the herbs she had grown herself. There were no advisors waiting for answers, no guards standing at attention, no one carefully choosing every word because they were speaking to the Alpha King. For one peaceful night, there was only Clara and big trouble. Clara looked at him and smiled. "You are a really good listener, you know that?" Nathaniel quietly watched her. If only she knew. She thought she was talking to a clever wolf who somehow understood emotions. She had no idea the ruler of the Northern Kingdom heard every single word. But maybe that was why she spoke so freely. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was simply sharing her thoughts with a friend. As the fire continued to glow, Clara told him more about her life. Not with sadness. Not because she wanted sympathy. Just honestly. "Being an Omega is strange sometimes," she said softly. "Some people see you and decide what you can or cannot do before they even know you." She looked down at her hands with a small smile. "They think because something is gentle, it must be weak." Nathaniel listened carefully. Those words stayed with him. His entire life, strength had always meant being the strongest person in the room, protecting others, carrying responsibility, never showing uncertainty. But Clara saw the world differently. She cared for tiny plants. She protected little animals. She noticed things most people ignored. And somehow, none of that made her weak. It made her stronger in a way he had never truly understood before. Clara looked toward the garden outside the window. "I think small things matter," she continued. "Not everyone needs to change the whole world. Sometimes helping one little piece of it is enough." Nathaniel remained silent, but deep inside, he knew something had changed. The kingdom respected his power. But Clara's kindness was something different. It did not demand anything. It simply existed. After a while, Clara turned back toward him. You know, Big Trouble. She paused for a moment. I think you might be my first real friend in a long time. Nathaniel froze slightly. Friend. It was such a simple word. Yet somehow, it meant more than the countless titles people had given him. Thousands respected the Alpha King. Many depended on the Alpha King. But Clara was the first person in years who simply enjoyed having him there. Not because of what he could provide. Not because of what he represented. Just because he was there. The night continued, and Clara kept talking until her voice slowly became quieter. Eventually, she fell asleep on the sofa, the exhaustion of repairing the garden finally catching up with her. Nathaniel watched the peaceful little cottage around him. He knew this was when he should leave. The castle was waiting. His duties were waiting. But instead, he carefully pulled a nearby blanket over Clara so she would stay warm. Then he moved near the door and rested there quietly. Not because anyone ordered him to protect something. Not because it was expected of him. But because the person who had given him a peaceful place to rest deserved peace too. For the first time in years, the Alpha King did not return to the castle at night. Not because of danger. Not because of a royal mission. Simply because he chose to stay. The next morning, sunlight entered through the windows as Clara slowly woke up. She looked around, then noticed the giant wolf still resting near the door. Her eyes widened in surprise. You stayed here all night? Nathaniel lifted his head. Clara walked closer with a gentle smile. Were you guarding me? She tilted her head playfully. Or maybe you just wanted to stay? Nathaniel looked away for a moment, and Clara laughed softly as if she already knew the answer. She sat beside him. So, Big Trouble, she said. Do you want to stay with me? Be my friend. Nathaniel knew there was a castle waiting for the Alpha King. But right here, there was someone waiting for Big Trouble. After a quiet moment, he lowered his head slightly and moved his tail in a small, honest answer. Yes. Clara smiled, not realizing that while she had just gained a new friend in her little cottage, the entire castle was about to discover that Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood had disappeared. From that morning on, Clara Whitmore's quiet little cottage gained a new routine. When she opened the door, Big Trouble was there. When she walked into the garden, Big Trouble followed. When she needed help moving something heavy, the giant silver-gray wolf was already waiting before she even asked. To Clara, it was simple. She had found the strangest, smartest, and most helpful wolf in the entire forest. She had no idea that the companion carrying water buckets and helping repair her garden was actually Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood, the ruler the entire northern kingdom respected. For 3 days, Nathaniel stayed near the cottage. 3 days without royal meetings. 3 days without hearing anyone call him Your Majesty. 3 days where the first thing he heard every morning was simply, Good morning, Big Trouble. And somehow, those words made him happier than he expected. Clara quickly discovered that having Big Trouble around was useful, although sometimes a little too useful. When she needed water from the stream, he helped carry it. When the garden needed fixing, he helped prepare the soil. When the small fence needed repairs, he stayed patiently beside her until it was finished. The problem was that Nathaniel was still Nathaniel. He was used to solving large problems quickly and efficiently. So when Clara asked him to help gather some firewood for the evening, she returned to find a pile much larger than necessary waiting beside the cottage. She stared at it. Then she looked at him. Big Trouble, she said slowly. I set enough wood for tonight, not enough for the entire winter. Nathaniel looked away. The Alpha King, who had managed countless important responsibilities, had somehow miscalculated the correct amount of firewood for one small cottage. Clara laughed and shook her head. You really do everything dramatically, do you know that? He did know. But strangely, he liked hearing her say it. During those days, Nathaniel also helped protect the garden. Birds sometimes try to steal seeds. Small animals wandered too close to the herbs. But after the rabbit incident, he remembered Clara's lesson. Strength did not always need to be overwhelming. So instead of frightening them, he simply guided them away. Clara noticed immediately. See, she said proudly. You are learning. Nathaniel lowered his head slightly, accepting the praise. It was almost unbelievable. The same wolf who represented power across the north was now being congratulated for being polite to garden visitors. And somehow, it became one of the best compliments he had ever received. Sometimes, Nathaniel went into the forest and found rare herbs Clara had spent months searching for. Every time he returned with exactly what she needed, Clara looked amazed. How do you always find these? She asked. Nathaniel could not answer, but he enjoyed seeing the excitement in her eyes. Slowly, the days became something he never expected. Peaceful, simple, real. At the castle, people needed the Alpha King. They needed his decisions, his protection, his strength. But here, Clara only needed big trouble. Someone to sit beside her while she worked. Someone to listen while she talked. Someone to share quiet moments with. Nathaniel knew he could not stay forever. A kingdom was waiting for him. Responsibilities did not disappear just because he found a place where he felt comfortable. But for the first time in a long time, he understood what he had been missing. He had always been needed. Clara made him feel wanted. On the evening of the third day, Clara prepared dinner while humming happily in the kitchen. Nathaniel rested near the cottage door, watching the little garden they had rebuilt together. Everything felt peaceful. Everything felt right. But far away from the quiet cottage, beyond the forest and behind the walls of the royal castle, things were not peaceful at all. Because while Clara thought she had simply made a new friend, the entire kingdom had just realized one serious problem. Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood had been missing for 3 days. While Clara Whitmore's little cottage was filled with peace, the royal castle was experiencing the exact opposite. For 3 days, Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood had not returned. At first, the guards believed their king was simply handling private matters. Nathaniel was known for being independent. Sometimes he needed quiet moments away from the responsibilities of ruling. But one evening became one day. One day became 3. And everyone who truly knew Nathaniel understood one thing. The Alpha King never ignored his responsibilities. He never missed important reports. He never allowed others to worry without reason. Something about this was unusual. Inside the castle, advisors searched through schedules and records, trying to understand where their king had gone. His personal guards checked every place he normally visited. The training grounds, the council chambers, the areas of the forest where he usually spent time. Nothing. It was almost as if the most powerful wolf in the Northern Kingdom had simply disappeared. What was the last unusual request His Majesty made? One of the guards finally asked. The servants thought carefully. Then one of them slowly raised a hand. Actually, there was something. Everyone immediately turned. Before he left, His Majesty requested the healthiest herb seedlings, rare plants, and seeds from the royal gardens. The room became silent. They waited for more information. There was none. That is all, a guard asked. The servant nodded. Everyone looked at each other in confusion. They had expected something different. A secret plan. An important mission. A royal project that only Nathaniel could handle. But herbs? Plants? Gardening supplies? That was possibly the strangest clue the Alpha King had ever left behind. Perhaps it is part of a larger strategy, one advisor suggested. Another nodded seriously. His Majesty always has a reason. Of course, none of them could imagine the real reason. Their powerful Alpha King was not solving a hidden royal problem. He was not preparing some complicated plan. He was currently helping an Omega take care of a small garden because he accidentally ruined it while chasing a rabbit. Following the only clue they had, Nathaniel's guards tracked the source of the plants and the direction he had traveled. The path eventually led them deep into the forest, far away from the castle walls, toward a quiet little cottage surrounded by herbs and flowers. As they approached, the guards prepared themselves for anything. Knowing Nathaniel, they expected to find something important, something serious, something worthy of the Alpha King disappearing for 3 days. But when they finally reached the edge of the trees, they stopped. Not because they found danger, because they could not believe what they were seeing. There, in the middle of a peaceful garden, was Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood in his silver-gray wolf form. The ruler respected across the entire north. The leader who commanded attention everywhere he went. And he was carefully helping arrange plants in a small herb garden. Then they heard Clara's voice. Careful, big trouble. Every guard froze. Big trouble? No one in the castle would ever think about calling their king something like that. But Clara continued without any hesitation. Remember what happened last time. No stepping on my herbs again. The guards waited for Nathaniel's reaction. They expected the powerful Alpha King they knew. Instead, they watched him calmly move his paw away from the plants and carefully step around them. The silence among the guards became even deeper. Their missing king, the wolf everyone had been searching for, was not trapped in some dangerous situation. He was not dealing with a secret mission. He was listening to a little Omega explain proper garden manners. But after the first moment of shock faded, the guards noticed something else. Something none of them expected. Nathaniel looked peaceful. The weight he always carried inside the castle seemed lighter. For the first time in years, Their Alpha King did not look like someone carrying an entire kingdom alone. He simply looked happy. They had finally found Nathaniel Blackwood. But they had also discovered something far more surprising. Somewhere inside this tiny garden, their king had found a piece of himself that the throne had never been able to give him. The moment Nathaniel Blackwood sensed the familiar presence hidden beyond the trees, he knew everything was about to change. Clara Whitmore was still smiling beside him, completely unaware that several members of the royal guard were standing quietly at the edge of the forest. They did not step forward. They did not call his name. They did not interrupt. The guards knew their Alpha King better than anyone. If they had found him, then Nathaniel had already found them first. His senses noticed every small detail. The quiet footsteps carefully avoiding dry branches. The controlled breathing of trained guards waiting patiently. The respectful distance they kept because they did not want to disturb the peaceful scene in front of them. They had finally discovered where their missing king had been for the last 3 days. But instead of finding him carrying a heavy responsibility, they found him carrying something completely different. Peace. Nathaniel continued helping Clara as if nothing had changed, but inside, he knew the truth. His time as only Big Trouble was ending. He had faced countless difficult moments as Alpha King. He had carried the expectations of an entire kingdom. He had made choices that required courage and strength. But this feeling was different. For the first time in years, Nathaniel Blackwood was afraid. Not afraid of danger. Not afraid of responsibility. Not afraid of returning to the throne. He was afraid of losing the way Clara looked at him. Because Clara did not see the ruler of the north. She saw the wolf who accidentally destroyed her garden. The one she scolded with a broom. The one she forced to plant herbs and apologize for chasing a little rabbit. The one she laughed with beside the fireplace. He wondered what would happen when she learned the truth. Would she step back? Would she lower her eyes like everyone else? Would she stop saying Big Trouble and start saying Your Majesty? Somehow, that possibility hurt more than he expected. That evening, Nathaniel allowed himself one more night. One more normal, simple, beautiful night. Clara prepared dinner the same way she always did. A warm bowl of chicken stew with vegetables and herbs from her garden. A small piece of bread. A cup of herbal tea by the fireplace. Nothing about it was grand. Nothing about it belonged in a palace. And that was exactly why Nathaniel treasured it. Clara talked while she cooked, telling him about a new section of the garden she wanted to create, and joking that this time she would make the pathways wider so Big Trouble had no excuse to step on anything. Nathaniel listened quietly. She had no idea how much he wanted to hear those ordinary words again tomorrow. After dinner, they sat beside the fireplace like they had done before. The warm light moved gently across the small cottage. Clara leaned back comfortably and looked at him with a smile. You know, Big Trouble, I think this place became much more interesting after you showed up. Nathaniel looked at her. If only she knew she had done the same thing for him. Before Clara, his days had purpose. But somewhere between the responsibilities and expectations, he had forgotten what it felt like to simply enjoy a moment. Clara gave that back to him without even realizing it. The night grew deeper, but neither of them moved away from the fireplace. Clara continued talking until her voice slowly became softer. Eventually, without noticing, she rested against his warm fur and fell asleep peacefully. Nathaniel remained completely still. Such a simple moment. Yet it meant more than any celebration held in his honor. People trusted the Alpha King because he was powerful. Clara trusted Big Trouble because he was there. That difference meant everything. He looked around the little cottage one more time. The herbs drying near the kitchen. The chair where Clara always drank tea. The fireplace where they shared quiet evenings. This was never supposed to become important to him. It was supposed to be one accident, one apology, one repaired garden. Instead, it became the place where he remembered who he was beyond the crown. But he knew he could not hide forever. Clara deserved the truth. His kingdom deserved their king. When the fire became low and the cottage was silent, Nathaniel carefully placed a blanket over Clara. He stayed for a moment longer, wishing time could slow down. Then he quietly walked toward the door. Before leaving, he looked back once. Clara was sleeping peacefully, still believing Big Trouble would be there in the morning. Nathaniel stepped into the forest where his guards were waiting. The moment they saw him approach, they bowed respectfully. There was no disappointment in their eyes, only relief that their king was safe. Nathaniel looked back toward the small cottage hidden between the trees. The place where no one saw a title. The place where someone saw him. Then, for the first time in days, Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood returned to the castle. The kingdom finally had its ruler back. But as the distance between him and Clara's garden grew, Nathaniel could not ignore one quiet truth. He had brought the Alpha King back to the throne, but a part of Big Trouble had stayed behind. When Nathaniel Blackwood returned to the castle, everything was exactly the way he remembered. The tall halls remained unchanged. The royal banners still hung proudly. The guards stood with respect as he passed. Everywhere he went, people lowered their heads and spoke the same familiar words. Your Majesty. It was the title he had carried for years. A title he respected. A responsibility he never wanted to abandon. Nathaniel was the Alpha King of the Northern Kingdom, and he understood what that meant. But this time, something felt different. The castle had not changed. His people had not changed. He had. The first dinner after his return was prepared perfectly. The table was filled with carefully made dishes. Everything was arranged exactly as a royal meal should be. But as Nathaniel looked at it, his thoughts drifted somewhere else. A small wooden table. A warm bowl of chicken stew. Fresh herbs from a little garden. Clara laughing as she teased him for liking the same plants he once destroyed. He missed the things he never expected to miss. The quiet sound of the forest. The warmth of the fireplace. The simple conversations about ordinary days. And more than anything, he missed hearing one name. Big Trouble. For years, Nathaniel believed the Alpha King and the person behind the crown had to be separate. The king carried responsibility. The king stayed strong. The king always put others first. But Clara had shown him something he forgot. Big Trouble was not a disguise. It was not a different version of him. It was simply the part of himself he had hidden away for too long. Meanwhile, far beyond the castle walls, Clara Whitmore continued caring for her little garden. Life returned to normal. At least, it looked that way. She collected herbs. She watered the plants. She prepared her meals and kept the cottage warm. Clara was still Clara. She was not someone who stopped living because someone left. But the garden was definitely quieter. No giant wolf accidentally blocking the pathway. No Big Trouble trying to help a little too much. No one sitting beside her while she talked about every small thing that happened during the day. Sometimes, without thinking, she would pick up a bucket near the garden and smile. My Big Trouble, can you help me? Then she would stop. The forest behind her stayed silent. Clara looked toward the trees where he used to appear and smiled softly, even though there was a little sadness in her eyes. She was not angry. She never thought he belonged to her. Maybe Big Trouble had simply returned to wherever he came from. Maybe he was happy there. And if he was happy, Clara wanted that for him. Days passed, but Nathaniel finally understood something. Returning to Clara did not mean running away from his responsibilities. It meant being honest with the one person who had accepted him without knowing anything about his power. She deserved to know the truth. And this time, he would not return as a wolf hiding behind silence. He would return as himself. That afternoon, Clara was working in her garden when she heard footsteps coming from the forest. She stopped. They were different. Not the familiar steps she had been secretly hoping to hear. When she looked up, she saw royal guards first. Then she saw him. Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood, the ruler of the North, the person everyone respected. He walked toward her with the calm presence of someone who carried an entire kingdom on his shoulders. Clara immediately understood this was someone important, someone far beyond the world of her tiny cottage and herb garden. For a moment, instinct told her to lower her head. She was only an Omega standing before the Alpha King. But then Nathaniel looked at her, and Clara froze. Because something about those eyes felt impossible to ignore. She had seen them before. Not in a palace. Not from a distance. She had seen those eyes beside a fireplace. She had seen them watching carefully while planting herbs. She had seen them every time she laughed and called someone Big Trouble. Nathaniel slowly walked closer. He did not stand above her like a king expecting respect. Instead, he lowered himself slightly, bringing his eyes level with hers, just like the friend who had always listened. Clara forgot about the guards. She forgot about the title. She forgot about the distance that was supposed to exist between an Alpha King and an Omega. She only saw the person she thought she had lost. Her voice became quiet. You are. She looked into his eyes again. My Big Trouble. For a moment, Nathaniel could not speak, because those were the exact words he had been afraid he would never hear again. She did not see the crown first. She saw him. A small smile appeared on his face. I was afraid you would stop calling me that. Clara looked at him silently as everything finally connected. The wolf who repaired her garden. The friend who shared dinner with her. The one who listened beside the fire. He had always been Nathaniel. And Nathaniel had always been Big Trouble. After a moment, Clara crossed her arms and looked at him with a familiar expression. You know, she said, you are still in trouble for leaving without saying goodbye. For the first time since leaving the cottage, Nathaniel felt the worry inside him disappear. Because Clara was still Clara. She was not looking at him like a distant king. She was looking at him like the friend who once ruined her herbs. The Alpha King had returned to his kingdom, but big trouble had finally come home. When Clara Whitmore first walked through the gates of the royal castle beside Nathaniel Blackwood, she finally understood how different his world truly was from hers. The same person who had sat beside her fireplace, helped carry water, and quietly listened to her stories was also the Alpha King everyone respected. The moment Nathaniel appeared, guards lowered their heads. Servants greeted him carefully. Every step he took reminded Clara that Big Trouble was not only the friend who once worked in her little garden. He was the leader of an entire kingdom. The castle was beautiful in a way Clara had never experienced before. Tall stone walls carried generations of history. Large halls stretched farther than her entire cottage. Every room seemed carefully arranged. Every movement followed tradition. But the strangest part was not the size of the castle. It was watching how everyone looked at Nathaniel. They admired him. They trusted him. They saw strength before anything else. Clara smiled softly because she knew something they did not. She knew the same Alpha King also once looked guilty after stepping on a patch of herbs. She knew the ruler everyone respected was also the Big Trouble who listened quietly beside a fireplace. But as the days passed, Clara began noticing something else. People were also watching her. Not everyone was unkind. Many were simply curious. After all, the Alpha King had returned from the forest with an Omega who lived in a small cottage and cared for herbs. To them, it was unexpected. Some wondered what made her different. Some wondered how someone so ordinary had become important to someone so powerful. Quiet conversations followed her through the castle halls. She seems kind, someone whispered one afternoon. But kindness alone cannot make someone Luna. Another voice answered. The Alpha King carries an entire kingdom. Can someone from such a simple life truly stand beside him? Clara heard the words. She did not hate them for asking. A part of her even understood why they wondered. She looked around at the castle, at the responsibilities Nathaniel carried every day, and for the first time, a quiet question entered her heart. Big Trouble liked having her beside him. But did Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood truly need someone like her in his world? Nathaniel noticed the change almost immediately. He noticed how Clara became a little quieter, how she looked at the castle gardens longer than usual, how she smiled the same way but carried more thoughts behind it. He could have commanded everyone to respect her. One sentence from him would have ended every whisper. But Nathaniel knew that was not what Clara needed. Forced silence was not the same as understanding. He did not want the kingdom to accept Clara because the Alpha King ordered them to. He wanted them to see the same person he saw. That evening, he found Clara standing outside near the castle garden. The moonlight covered the flowers, and for a moment, it almost reminded him of her little cottage. Are you afraid of the castle? Nathaniel asked gently. Clara turned toward him. He smiled slightly. Or the people inside it? She was quiet for a moment before answering honestly. I am not afraid of them. I just wonder if I belong here. Nathaniel walked closer. In that moment, he was not approaching her as a king. He was simply the same person who had once sat beside her fireplace. Clara, he said, you hit the owner of this entire castle with a broom. Clara froze. Then she looked away, embarrassed. You are never going to let me forget that, are you? Nathaniel smiled. Probably not. For the first time that day, Clara laughed. Then Nathaniel continued, his voice becoming softer. You were brave enough to scold the Alpha King before you knew his name. So tell me, what exactly inside these walls is supposed to make you feel weak? Clara looked at him. Those words stayed with her. Nathaniel was not reminding her of that moment to tease her. He was reminding her who she had always been. I did not bring you here because I wanted the castle to change you, he said. I brought you here because of who you already are. Clara looked down at her hands. The same hands that planted herbs, cooked simple meals, and cared for small creatures everyone else ignored. But being beside you means more than taking care of a garden, she said quietly. Nathaniel nodded. Yes, but do you know why that garden mattered to me? She looked up. Because you saw value where others might not look. You protected small things. You cared even when no one was watching. He paused. That is not weakness, Clara. The words reached her heart more than any royal promise could. You do not need to become someone else, Nathaniel continued. Use the same kindness, courage, and heart that saved Big Trouble. Let them see the Clara I already know. Clara smiled softly. For the first time since entering the castle, the walls around her did not feel quite as tall. She realized she did not need to become powerful in the same way Nathaniel was. She did not need to compete with the strength of an Alpha King. She only needed to trust the strength she already carried. Because the girl who changed Big Trouble's heart was never weak. She simply had a different kind of power. After her conversation with Nathaniel Blackwood beneath the moonlight, Clara Whitmore stopped trying to figure out how to become someone the castle would accept. Instead, she decided to do the one thing she had always done. She would simply be herself. The next morning, Clara walked through the castle not as someone trying to copy royal traditions or prove that she deserved attention. She walked through it the same way she walked through her little cottage garden, noticing things others often missed. She noticed the tired expression of a servant who had worked since sunrise. She noticed flowers near the windows that needed more sunlight. She noticed small details that most people passed every day without seeing. Eventually, Clara discovered the royal herb garden. At first glance, it was beautiful. It was much larger than her garden in the forest, with carefully arranged paths and rare plants collected from different places across the kingdom. But after spending a few minutes there, Clara tilted her head. Something was wrong. The plants were cared for, but they were not truly thriving. Some herbs needed different soil. Some were receiving too much shade. Others were being treated the same way even though every plant had different needs. To Clara, a garden was not just a collection of plants. It was something alive, something you had to understand. When she began helping the gardeners, a few nobles watching nearby became curious. Some still did not understand why the future Luna would spend her time with herbs instead of focusing only on royal matters. She is kind, one person quietly said. But is taking care of plants really what someone beside the Alpha King should be doing? Clara heard the question, but this time, she did not shrink away from it. She also did not argue, because Clara had never believed kindness needed to be proven with words. So she simply continued working. She adjusted the garden little by little. She explained which herbs needed more space. She showed the gardeners how different plants responded to different conditions. She remembered tiny details about every herb because she cared enough to learn them. Slowly, the people around her started paying attention. They realized Clara was not just someone who liked flowers. She understood healing. She understood patience. She understood how small changes could create something beautiful over time. Soon, her kindness reached beyond the garden. When she noticed some of the castle workers looking exhausted after long days, she prepared calming herbal tea for them. When younger gardeners struggled, she patiently taught them instead of criticizing their mistakes. When someone needed help, Clara helped the same way she always had. Not because she wanted recognition, simply because that was who she was. The whispers inside the castle slowly changed. The same people who once wondered if kindness was enough began understanding something important. Clara's strength did not look like Nathaniel's, but that did not mean it was any less valuable. Nathaniel protected the kingdom by carrying heavy responsibilities. Clara protected the little things people sometimes forgot. One afternoon, an older advisor who had questioned her place beside Nathaniel stood quietly near the restored herb garden. He watched as the people who worked there smiled more freely than they had in a long time. Then he finally understood. The Alpha King protects the kingdom with strength, he said softly. But she protects the things strength cannot reach. Nathaniel heard those words from a distance. He smiled, but he was not surprised. Everyone else was finally seeing what he had seen from the beginning. The same Clara who cared about a frightened rabbit. The same Clara who shared her simple dinner with a mysterious wolf. The same Clara who believed every small thing mattered. She had not changed to fit the castle. The castle had finally learned how to see her. Later that evening, Nathaniel found Clara in the royal garden. The sunset covered the flowers with a warm golden color, reminding both of them of the little cottage where everything started. Nathaniel walked beside her and looked around at everything she had improved. Still causing trouble? He asked with a small smile. Clara looked at him and raised an eyebrow. I learned from Big Trouble. For a moment, they were not the Alpha King and the future Luna standing in a royal garden. They were simply Nathaniel and Clara again. The same two people who laughed beside a fireplace and rebuilt a little herb garden together. Nathaniel looked at her and realized something. He had never needed Clara to become someone else. The person who changed his heart was already enough. And now the kingdom was beginning to understand that too. A Luna did not need to have the same strength as an Alpha King. She needed the strength to stand beside him with a heart that was completely her own. But there was still one truth Clara had not fully discovered yet. She was not only the person Nathaniel had chosen. She was the person his heart had recognized long before he understood why. After everything that happened, the castle slowly stopped feeling like a place Clara Whitmore had entered and started becoming a place where she belonged. The whispers that once followed her through the halls began to fade. The people who once wondered why Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood had chosen an Omega from a quiet forest cottage now understood there was much more to Clara than they first saw. She was not trying to become someone powerful. She was not trying to change herself to match the castle. She simply brought the same kindness that once filled her little garden into a much larger world. Nathaniel watched as the castle changed around her. The same hands that once cared for a few rows of herbs now helped restore an entire royal garden. The same heart that protected a frightened rabbit now cared for the people around her. Clara had not become different. Everyone else had finally learned how to see her. And the more Nathaniel watched, the more he understood something he had felt from the very beginning. There was a reason he could never forget the little Omega who swung a broom at him. There was a reason he returned to her cottage again and again. There was a reason why, after years of carrying the weight of being Alpha King, the only place where he felt completely at peace was beside Clara. At first, he thought it was curiosity. Then he thought it was gratitude. Then friendship. Then something deeper. But now he finally understood what his instincts had recognized long before his mind accepted it. The bond between them had always been there, quietly waiting. But that realization also brought a new worry. Nathaniel did not tell Clara immediately. Not because he wanted to hide the truth. He had already learned from Big Trouble that honesty mattered more than fear. But this was different. He did not want Clara to look back at everything they shared and wonder if it was only because of destiny. Because to Nathaniel, the most important moments between them were never created by a bond. Destiny did not make him return with herb seedlings after ruining her garden. Destiny did not make him stay beside the fireplace listening to her stories. Destiny did not make him love a simple bowl of chicken stew because Clara made it with care. Those choices were his. One evening, Nathaniel found Clara in the royal garden. The same garden that once made her feel like an outsider now carried pieces of her everywhere. The plants were healthier. The pathways felt warmer. Somehow, even inside the castle, Clara had created the same peaceful feeling as her little cottage. They sat together beneath the evening sky, and for a while, neither of them spoke. There was no Alpha King and Omega. No titles. No expectations. Just Nathaniel and Clara, like they had always been. Finally, Nathaniel looked at her. Clara, there is something I need to tell you. She turned toward him. His serious expression made her curious, but she was not afraid. She trusted him. From the beginning, I felt something different with you, he admitted. Something I could not explain. Clara listened quietly. At first, I did not understand why I kept thinking about the girl who chased me out of her garden. A small smile appeared on Clara's face. You mean the girl who was protecting her herbs from a very troublesome wolf? Nathaniel smiled too. Exactly. Then his voice softened. But now I understand. The connection between us was not ordinary. Clara slowly realized what he meant. A mate bond. Nathaniel nodded. For a moment, she looked away, processing everything. She thought about every memory they had built together. Every laugh. Every conversation. Every quiet moment. Then a small question appeared in her heart. So was all of this because of the bond? Nathaniel immediately understood what she feared. The same fear he had carried before telling her. He shook his head gently. No, he looked directly at her. The bond may have led me to you. But every moment after that was my choice. Clara looked back at him. Nathaniel continued. The bond did not make me enjoy sitting beside your fireplace. It did not make me miss hearing you call me Big Trouble. It did not make that little cottage feel like home. His expression softened. That was you. The quiet garden surrounded them as Clara let his words settle in her heart. Slowly, she understood. Destiny had not taken away their choices. It had only opened a door. They were the ones who walked through it. The bond might have brought an Alpha King into a small herb garden. But everything that happened after was built by Nathaniel and Clara themselves. Clara Whitmore stayed quiet for a while after hearing Nathaniel Blackwood's words. The royal garden around them was peaceful, but her thoughts traveled much farther away. She was not questioning Nathaniel. She believed him. She knew the person sitting beside her would never reduce everything they shared to something as simple as fate. But for the first time, Clara looked back at their entire journey knowing that destiny had been quietly there from the beginning. And strangely, The first thing she remembered was not the Alpha King standing proudly before the kingdom. It was a giant wolf standing in her ruined herb garden, looking guilty after causing complete chaos while chasing a tiny rabbit. She remembered holding her broom and telling him that he had to take responsibility. She remembered calling him Big Trouble because somehow no other name fit him better. She remembered making the most powerful wolf in the north carefully plant herbs, carry water, and learn how to protect small things instead of overwhelming them. A soft laugh escaped her. Nathaniel looked at her curiously. "What are you thinking about?" Clara smiled. "I am thinking that Destiny has a strange sense of humor." He raised an eyebrow. "Why?" She looked at him. "Because if I had met Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood first, maybe everything would have been different." Nathaniel became quiet. Clara continued gently. "I probably would have worried about saying the wrong thing. I would have seen the crown, the title, and everything everyone else sees." She looked toward the garden with a warm expression. "But I met Big Trouble first." Those words meant more to Nathaniel than she realized. Clara turned back to him. "I met someone who stayed to fix a mistake. Someone who listened when I talked. Someone who sat beside a fireplace and made my little cottage feel less lonely." Her voice softened. "The bond might have brought you to my garden." She smiled. "But you are the one who stayed." Nathaniel looked at Clara, and for a moment, all the worries he once carried disappeared. The fear that she would only see the Alpha King. The fear that Big Trouble would vanish once she knew the truth. Clara had answered all of it. She never loved the title first. She loved the person behind it. Clara looked directly at him and said the words he never knew he needed to hear. "I did not fall for a crown. I fell for the wolf who stayed." The quiet connection between them felt clearer than ever. Not like something forcing them together. Not like destiny making a choice for them. It was simply a peaceful understanding. Like their hearts had known something long before they found the words for it. Destiny had opened the first door, but Nathaniel and Clara had chosen every step after that themselves. Then, just when the moment became too serious, Clara tilted her head slightly. However, Nathaniel immediately recognized that expression. It was the same one she had when she caught him sneaking herbs back into her garden. "However," he repeated. Clara crossed her arms. "Just because you are my mate does not mean you are forgiven." Nathaniel looked genuinely confused. "Forgiven for what?" Clara looked at him as if the answer was obvious. "My herbs." For a second, the powerful Alpha King of the Northern Kingdom had no response. Then he laughed. A real, relaxed laugh that very few people outside Clara had ever heard. No matter how much changed, something stayed exactly the same. To the kingdom, he was Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood. To Clara, he would always be the Big Trouble who owed her a garden apology. A few days later, they returned together to the small cottage where everything began. The little herb garden was healthier than ever. The pathways were wider now, mostly because Clara still joked that certain wolves needed extra space. Standing there again, they both remembered how unlikely everything had been. A frightened rabbit, a damaged garden, a broom, a mistake that somehow became the beginning of something neither of them expected. Clara looked around the place she once thought was her entire world. Now she understood something. Becoming Luna did not mean leaving this version of herself behind. She did not need to replace the girl who cared for herbs and talked beside a fireplace. That girl was exactly the person Nathaniel chose. She would stand beside the Alpha King not because destiny demanded it, but because they chose each other. And soon, the entire kingdom would celebrate that choice. A Luna would be officially welcomed. A new chapter would begin. But no matter how large the castle became, or how many people called him Alpha King, Clara would always remember the truth. Their story did not start with a throne. It started in a little herb garden, where a powerful king became her Big Trouble. The day Clara Whitmore was officially welcomed as Luna was not remembered because of the beauty of the ceremony or the size of the celebration. It was remembered because everyone finally understood why Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood had chosen her. When Clara first entered the castle, many people wondered if an Omega from a small forest cottage could truly stand beside the most powerful Alpha in the north. They wondered if kindness was enough. They wondered if someone who spent her days caring for herbs could understand the responsibility of a kingdom. But now, as Clara stood beside Nathaniel, no one asked those questions anymore, because Clara had already answered them without needing to say a word. She had shown them that strength did not always need to be loud. Sometimes strength was patience. Sometimes it was compassion. Sometimes it was noticing the small things everyone else ignored. The kingdom did not accept Clara simply because she was loved by the Alpha King. They accepted her because they had learned to love her too. Nathaniel looked at Clara during the ceremony and could not stop himself from remembering where everything started. Not inside a castle, not during an important royal meeting, not with perfect introductions. It started in a little herb garden with a very angry Omega holding a broom and a very guilty wolf realizing he had made a terrible mistake. The thought almost made him smile. Out of everyone in the kingdom, Clara was the only person who met the Alpha King and decided he needed a lesson in garden manners. And somehow, that was exactly the person he needed most. After Clara became Luna, many expected her life to completely change. But they quickly discovered something surprising. Clara remained Clara. She still woke early to visit the gardens. She still checked the herbs herself. She still prepared tea for people when she noticed they were tired. She still stopped to talk with gardeners and servants the same way she always had. The title changed, but her heart never did. And perhaps the most unexpected change in the castle was not Clara. It was Nathaniel. The Alpha King who once seemed unreachable now spent more time laughing. The ruler who carried the weight of an entire kingdom somehow looked lighter. And sometimes, the guards would witness something they never imagined before. The strongest Alpha in the north standing in a garden, holding tools, while helping his Luna care for plants. At first, everyone was shocked. No one knew what to say when they saw their king carefully carrying soil or moving flower pots because Clara asked him to help. But eventually, the castle became used to it. They learned there was one person who could look directly at the Alpha King and simply say, "Big trouble. Those plants are not going to move themselves." And somehow, Nathaniel Blackwood, the leader respected across the entire kingdom, would actually listen. Not because he had to, not because Clara ordered him, but because with her, he was allowed to be something more than a king. He was allowed to be himself. The nickname that once belonged only to a little cottage slowly became something the castle understood. No one else would ever call him Big Trouble. That name belonged to Clara. It carried every memory between them. A ruined garden, a repaired mistake, a friendship that grew into something neither of them expected. One evening, after the celebrations ended and the castle became quiet again, Nathaniel asked Clara to come with him somewhere. No guards, no ceremony, no titles, just the two of them. And when Clara saw the familiar path through the forest, she already knew where they were going. Back to the little cottage. Back to the herb garden where an Alpha King first learned what it felt like to simply be Big Trouble. The path through the forest felt exactly the same as it did before, but everything between Nathaniel Blackwood and Clara Whitmore had changed. The first time they met in this little garden, Clara did not know she was looking at the Alpha King. Nathaniel did not know the Omega holding a broom would become the person who changed his entire world. They looked around the small cottage and smiled at all the memories hidden there. A frightened rabbit running through the herbs. A giant wolf making the biggest mistake of his life by stepping into the wrong garden. A girl brave enough to scold him. A simple apology that somehow became the beginning of everything. That evening, they stayed at the cottage just like they used to. Clara prepared chicken stew with vegetables and fresh herbs from the garden. Nathaniel sat near the fireplace with a cup of herbal tea, remembering the first time he experienced this quiet happiness. The castle had everything a king could ever need. But this little cottage gave him something different. It gave him a place where he was not loved because he was powerful. He was loved because he was himself. Later, as the fire warmed the room and the night settled around them, Nathaniel looked at Clara with a small smile. "Tell me the truth," he said. Clara looked at him curiously. "About what?" Nathaniel leaned back slightly. "If you knew that wolf in your garden was actually the Alpha King, would you still have chased him with a broom?" Clara became quiet, pretending to think seriously. Nathaniel waited for her answer. Finally, she nodded. "Probably." He raised an eyebrow. "Probably." Clara tried not to smile. "Maybe I would have used a smaller broom." For a moment, Nathaniel simply stared at her. Then he laughed. The same warm laugh only Clara could bring out of him. The entire kingdom respected Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood, but only Clara could remind him that he was still Big Trouble. After a while, the laughter faded into a peaceful silence. Nathaniel looked around the cottage again. "Before I met you, I had a kingdom. I had respect. I had people who depended on me." His voice became softer. "But I never realized how much I needed a place where I could simply be Nathaniel." Clara looked at him quietly. "The kingdom found a Luna," he said. "But I found my home." Clara smiled because she understood exactly what he meant. She had never fallen in love with a title or a perfect image. She cared about the one who returned after making a mistake, the one who planted every herb he ruined, the one who stayed beside the fireplace and listened. Her big trouble. Sometime later, on a peaceful morning, Nathaniel decided to help Clara in the garden again. After everything they had been through, he was much better at caring for plants than before. At least, that was what he believed. Until Clara walked over and noticed a small section of herbs leaning in a very unusual direction. She looked at the plants. Then she looked at Nathaniel. Big trouble. The strongest alpha in the north immediately stopped moving. He knew that tone. He looked at Clara, then at the herbs, then back at Clara again. After a moment, he sighed with a smile. I know. I will get the shovel. Clara laughed, and that sound meant more to him than any praise he had ever received. Years later, people across the kingdom would tell many stories about Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood. They would talk about his wisdom, his strength, and the way he protected his people. But those closest to him knew another story. The story of a powerful king who met a small Omega with a kind heart, a garden full of herbs, and a broom she was not afraid to use. Not because Clara was stronger than him, not because she needed to win, but because with Clara, Nathaniel never had to prove anything. He could simply be himself. A king gave her a crown, but a little garden gave him a home.